Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that helps you discover deeper levels of truth, meaning, and wholeness. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is a professor, author, and researcher. Her work explores the philosophy of education, wisdom research, and how philosophical dialogue can be integrated into all levels of education. She's the author of Philosophizing, the Dialogos Way Towards Wisdom in Education, an in-depth book that analyzes different approaches to philosophical practices and shows how we can integrate them in a holistic manner in order to facilitate everything from critical thinking to spiritual contemplation. Guro Hansen Helskog, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. And I'd like to start by setting a bit of context. In the last couple of years, I've increasingly been getting into philosophy, and I'm particularly interested in the idea that we can discover wisdom by philosophizing and being in deep conversation with others. And I came across your book on John Vervaeke's new lecture series, After Socrates. And, it looked like it was right up my alley, given my current interests. And in it, you share various perspectives on wisdom development and different ways of philosophizing, ultimately landing on philosophizing the Dialogos way. And maybe we could start the conversation by you explaining what Dialogos is and how Dialogos has been intimately linked with your life experiences, both as a childhood youth educator and researcher.
Yeah. I think actually I would like to start from my own childhood, because I grew up in a family where we didn't speak much. It was a farm family in Norway. And I can still remember the family dinners where I could hear the cutlery click against the plates and everything. And it was like, and I really missed dialogue. And I think also that maybe all the others did too in the family. Everyone was probably quite lonely in their own worlds, so to speak. And I think this is quite normal, actually, that families don't necessarily have so much dialogues about things that matter. People speak about practical things and things that are to be done, but maybe not so much about life itself. And so this has kind of been sticking with me since I was a child myself. And I also remember, we all probably have these moments in our lives that stand out as especially important. And there is one moment I was in the university as a student, and I was in the student parliament, and we had a kind of a year dinner, and I was sitting beside a guy, and he was looking around and he said, "Oh, now I think we're sitting amongst the most intelligent students in Norway." And I was like, yeah, obviously there's a lot of intelligent people here, but is there really integrity in this room? And further, is there really wisdom in this room? And of course, these were young people in their, from early 20s till late 20s, maybe. And a lot of them have later, positions in high up ranked positions in society as lawyers, working in the parliament, government, in all kinds of positions. But so yes, obviously intelligence was there, but was there wisdom? And that's really the start of the whole thing, where I've been working now since I was maybe since 1993, I think, since this happened, developing Dialogos.
Yeah, that really resonates, like the whole sitting around the table and not really talking about anything, or if there is a conversation, it's more practical. Certainly that's been an experience that I have a lot of with my family, like my parents, and I have little kids, so I hope to facilitate more conversation as they, and constantly engage them as they get older. But also the piece about being around people that are intelligent, right? And like very competent in a practical kind of way and having these high up positions, and kind of see that like there's people that are very wealthy, billionaires, and there's people that have very prestigious positions. But then there's something, it's like that I don't necessarily look up to them. It's like, okay, you have a very high prestigious position or you make a lot of money, but there's something else. And I think that's wisdom. That's what it is. Like there's something about wisdom that like I could sense that with certain people. And it's not necessarily that they have a certain high position. It's just like, oh, something attracts me to this person. And the only way that I could categorize is like, this person seems wise. They seem to have a right relationship to different things in life.
Or maybe it is, maybe we can't really become wise once and for all, but maybe having this curiosity about what other people think and about, being able to connect. That's really what I missed both in my home and like in the student parliament. There was a lot of discussions about, political matters that didn't really matter sometimes. But sometimes very hard to get into deep dialogue and deep contact, existential contact with the people. And of course, maybe it's because they were young, but I think a lot of people go around all their lives and never really have that feeling of being in deep contact with other people, which I find a very important starting point for developing wisdom. The curiosity, the ability to create contact, and then the curiosity about the perspective of the other.
Yeah, so maybe this is actually a good part to kind of talk about what is wisdom. And you actually integrate a lot of different perspectives. And you just said that we never become wise. Like there's never an end point. It's more of like a process. So maybe you could kind of unpack wisdom a little bit more of how you think about what wisdom is.
And then you even though I've written a lot about it, I still get the, how can we really talk about it? What is wisdom really? Socrates said that if I can start with Socrates, he's considered to be one of the first real philosophers in the history of Western thought. And people kept saying to him that he was wise, or they hold him as one of the wisest in Athens. And he wondered, why is that? So he started asking people. That's really how his practice started. He started asking people to find out if they were wise, and he found out that most people, they didn't even know what they were talking about. They talked about this and that, and then when he questioned them, they started to kind of swim because they lost track and they couldn't really answer his questions. In the end, he confused them, and then his wisdom was kind of like, at least I don't say I know a lot of things that I don't know, and that's maybe my wisdom, he said. So maybe it's and I think a lot of wisdom researchers also agree on that wisdom is maybe humility, not the least epistemic humility, or humility concerning what we really can know anything about. We can easily count the chairs in a room, or measure the height of a tree, or counting the number of people who has this or that opinion, maybe. But is that knowledge, and does it have anything to do with wisdom? No, maybe not at all. So humility as to what we can know anything about, and also maybe flexibility of thinking, that the ability to see from different perspectives, to see that a thing or a perspective or a truth, two opposite things can be true at the same time. it's possible to hold two opposite perspectives and say that these are all part of the same, or the part of the full picture. So maybe this is close to wisdom, and I do think that a lot of the wisdom researchers that I've explored would also agree on this, and that philosophizing, which is what the philosophical practitioners I've written about talk about in their different ways. They hold kind of, some are more rational in their approaches, while others are more contemplative. But still, I think this whole being able to hold different perspectives and being flexible of mind and being also have a humility as to what we really can know.
Yeah, so it's this kind of humility and this ability with not knowing, and Socrates used to put people into this state of, I think it's called aporia, right? It's like the state of not knowing. And it's like from there, it's from that place that insights emerge, from this, I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. And I teach in the University of Southeastern Norway, and I teach pedagogy. And one of the classes I teach, there are people with all kinds of different backgrounds, economy, law, marketing, but also like Norwegian language and literature, social science studies, all these kind of school subjects that they are going to teach. They are in the room, and sometimes, most of them get really confused down the road, because they ask, what is really pedagogy about? Now we're studied this for maybe half a year, but I get more and more confused. What is it really about? And I think pedagogy is also kind of like wisdom. A good educator or a good pedagogue don't really often know exactly what he or she is doing. It just comes out right because it's embodied. The wise educator has embodied some knowledge that is not so easily explained, and getting others to come to that place, so to speak, of not knowingness and humility and flexibility of mind is really painful for people sometimes, because you have to let go of some of your convictions.
Yeah, there's actually a lot that there's a lot of personal stuff you share in your book that I would like to circle about, where it seems like you went through this kind of process yourself of like letting go of some ideas about reality. And I'm really fascinated about that, like how our beliefs and our perceptions they create our reality, right? And then we see the things and we get attached to a certain way of seeing and a certain perspective, and we get stuck in that. And it seems like this process of philosophizing can kind of expand our perception and help us see different perspectives. And, you mentioned a lot of different methods of philosophizing in the book, and you said some of the approaches are more kind of rational and some of them are more contemplative. Can you kind of like unpack how Dialogos is different, or like how does Dialogos look at philosophizing compared to these other approaches?
Well, I would really like to be a little bit careful about saying that, I've explored just a few texts, and what people do is really not always the same as what they write in their texts. So I feel a little, there's the humility that I feel a little, so how is it different? But I think, like Oscar Brennefier, who's a figure in this field, he likes to think about philosophizing as thinking in antinomies, in opposites, like mind, body, thinking, feeling, all these opposing. And then when he invites people into philosophizing, he kind of tries to get them to see from the other perspective, and it's a very painful process for many people if they're not used to it, because it really makes you turn your thinking around, and it's very rational. He doesn't use personal experiences. And then you have like Leonard Nelson, who was kind of the first in the world who really tried to make a philosophical practice. He lived in Germany during the mid-war times, between around his maybe main period was in the 1920s and 30s, and he was a professor of philosophy, and he let his students kind of philosophize. He threw questions into the class and had them philosophize until they kind of lost track of where they were, kind of like using the Socratic method. But he let them, not like Socrates. Brennefier is probably more like Socrates in his way of working, while Nelson, as far as I understand from his writing, seemed to be more letting the students themselves throw questions back and forth between them. But it was still quite rational. His student again, Gustav Heckmann, he was a mathematician. He introduced the personal example, or the example, philosophizing concretely upon examples, as a way to kind of limit and create a focus. And what I've kind of done is really to get inspired by both all these approaches, and also from like Finn Torbjørn Hansen in Denmark, who is more existential in his way. He's a phenomenologist, existential phenomenology, and has kind of taken the Socratic dialogue, the German tradition, into a more existential, Kierkegaard-inspired way of philosophizing, Heidegger, including Heidegger. And then you have Ran Lahav, who I've also been working with, who is more using the text from the philosophical tradition as starting points for philosophizing in a more contemplative way, kind of like how you would meet it in monasteries, Christian monasteries. So it's very different. And when I do facilitate a Dialogos retreat or a workshop, I like to try to include exercises or dialogue formats that are inspired by all these different approaches, in order to kind of transcend our current way of thinking.
Yeah, so is the Dialogos, or the way you do Dialogos, it's this kind of integrative approach, or is Dialogos has it always been this kind of integrative approach? And then also, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Dialogos is kind of this word Dialogos. It came to me. I was writing these books. I had a contract with a publisher, and I needed a name for the books. And then one morning I just woke up and the name was there, Dialogos, and I didn't know what it really meant. And then later I had this professor of theology, Notto Telle. He's Norwegian, but he's been working a lot with dialogues between the East and the West, between Buddhism and Christianity. And I asked him to write 3 texts for me on wisdom perspectives in Buddhism, in Islam and Christianity, that could be read by 14-year-olds. And he sent me these beautiful texts. And there I really understood what Dialogos meant, because it's the opening words of the Apostle John in the New Testament. In the beginning was the word, logos. Word in Greek is logos. So it's the same kind of logos that is in Dialogos, but also in logic. So logic is also there. And wisdom. So Notto's suggestion was that it could, the opening words of John could have been, in the beginning was wisdom, and wisdom was with God. And to me, that was kind of a revelation. It was a mind-blowing experience. And this is also what it belongs to the story that this work transformed my entire being and my worldview. I called myself an atheist until the 12th of April, 2007. And then I said to the publisher that in the last books, I needed to explore the relationship between believing and knowing. And in order to do that, I needed to understand from the inside what it means to be a believing person. So I did, again, this interest in the perspective of others that I try to live by. So I really started talking to people, that were believers of different, both congregations and also religions. And things started to happen around me and in me in ways that were really mind-blowing. So I'm not an atheist anymore. And then Notto comes with these texts. So Dialogos is, if I am to say, to kind of pull out something that makes Dialogos different from the other approaches that I mentioned and which I have a deep respect for, and also my good colleague Mikael Noah-Weiss, we work a lot together now. I also mentioned he's very much into guided imageries, which I write about also in the book. But it's probably the heart-to-heart encounters. I think that when people meet heart-to-heart, as a metaphor, of course, but when they really touch each other, both are changed. That's where healing also happened. I've been working in a psychiatric hospital for 6 years. And Dialogos to me is a healing practice also.
Yeah, I'm actually, I mean, there's a lot you said there that I could kind of build off of, but I was curious if you've heard of John Vervaeke.
No, actually not. Can you tell me?
It's so amazing, yeah, because John Vervaeke, he's quite kind of a big deal in the spaces that I move in. He's a cognitive scientist in the University of Toronto. I wouldn't say he's famous, but he's famous in he's famous in the circles that I move in. But he's been really big on Dialogos, like really big. That's the first time I heard the word Dialogos, and I actually got your book. He recommends it in his lecture series After Socrates. So he had a huge lecture series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And it's, I don't know how many episodes, it's huge. And that's where he got known from that. And then from there, he's just kind of on a lot of podcasts, and he does his own podcasts. And but yeah, I actually did a Dialogos course with him. He does.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they do a Dialogos course, him and this guy Sengstock. I did it once. It was just kind of too much for me because I think it was like 4 hours straight, and it was only like a 15-minute break. They didn't give like a lunch break, and I've already done a lot of stuff in the first half of the day, so I was kind of like tired. But the whole process was very fascinating for me. But yeah, I'm actually surprised you've never heard of him. So he might be somebody that you would like to explore, because he's very much entrenched in the Dialogos and philosophizing, and kind of also he's kind of trying to bridge almost like science and religion. He's like the scientist guy, and he's trying to bridge science and religion and philosophy and put all these things together. So yeah, I just thought I would bring him up because
Yeah, I'm not sure why, because, but as a professor in the university, my world is also full of other tasks. So maybe, and now I don't know when he started his work, but I definitely look into him.
Yeah. I think you'll enjoy him.
Yeah. So this name, at least for me, came in 2004.
Dialogos.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know when he came across it. I've recently heard him using it, but
Yeah.
I feel like he's been trying to be in these kind of conversations. Like if you ever see him in conversation with people, he's very like almost like a child, like just like what can I learn from this person? There is like that sense of humility. Like I get that sense of humility from him.
Uh-huh.
And I think you would notice that too if you listen to some of his lectures. And yeah, it's quite fascinating stuff. But
Yeah. So can I ask you what brought you into this?
yeah, I think, I mean, I wouldn't know where to start. What brought me into my interest with Dialogos, or my
Or
interest with
with,
philosophy, or yeah.
yeah, and what you do? I mean, you have a mission, obviously.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think at the core is really kind of what you some of the things you said earlier about, sitting around at the table and not talking about what really matters. Um, and I think I've had some experiences that kind of really shifted things for me. And I think it's kind of similar to your your story about being an atheist and then no longer being an atheist. And I grew up in a family that was very like kind of not religious at all, very kind of scientific based, kind of rational. So I always kind of considered myself an atheist. Actually, I think I remember as a child, one of my friends' fathers asked me, "Oh, or like, do you believe in God, or are you an atheist, or are you agnostic?" And I've never heard of these terms before. And he's like, "Oh, well, atheist doesn't believe, or if you believe, you follow religion, you believe in God." Or there's also agnostic, which is like you don't know. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that one, I don't know." But as I got older, I was like, I think I didn't really think about it much, but I think I saw myself as an atheist. I was like, religion is nonsense. Like, well, this man in the sky is it's all nonsense. So I was kind of had this more scientific view until that kind of I don't know what it was, but there was like this. I would get this thought in my head that life is a paradox, and I couldn't explain what it meant, but it was just like, oh, however I'm trying to figure out life or understand life, there's a reason beyond that, or there's something that's beyond this kind of conceptual, logical way of thinking. And yeah, and I guess that kind of brought me into, meditation and eventually psychedelics. And that's I've had like several mystical experiences that, I've spoke about them on my channel. I have like a video talking about this experience. And there was no word I could use other than God for the experience. It was like there was no other word, even though how the experience was, it was not like the conception of God that I thought people had, or the way people would use God as like this man in the sky and you go to heaven after you die. It was completely beyond anything I could use any other words to describe. And I guess since then I've been kind of um, trying to figure out, how do I integrate that into my day-to-day life? How do I integrate that into my interactions? This sense of meaning, like this infinite meaning, this sacredness, this divinity that's everywhere. It's just we're swimming in it, we're embedded in it, but it's almost like we're asleep to it. And we don't recognize how precious and how sacred life is. And that's why we can have like not talk to people, not have deep, meaningful conversations for years. But how would that switch? How does that switch when you think about, well, maybe I'll never see this person again, right? And like to me, that's almost like holding on to that sense of like, this may be my last conversation with you. So what is important for us to say? And I think that kind of, I've been on that kind of path, and it brought me into this other practice called circling. I don't know if you heard about it, circling, but it's a relational practice. And it's different from philosophizing, because in philosophizing, you're kind of playing more with ideas in a way, even though you could bring the personal in, like, as you like to say. But it's very much, what is it like for us to be here together? Rather than talking about something else, what is it like for you and me to be here together? It's focusing really on the connection. So I think that, and I started doing a lot of that, and then I kind of been interested in John Vervaake's work, and he talks a lot about dialogos and philosophizing. And I'm like, oh, how do we integrate? And Guy Senkstock, the other guy who teaches this course with him, he's actually the originator of the circling practice. So they're kind of bringing these two worlds together. And yeah, I guess that's kind of some of my story, my background of how I got into all this stuff. And yeah, I'm curious how that lands with you. And I'd also actually like to hear a little more about, your experience from having this kind of, from being an atheist, and then, like, because I really enjoyed that story in your book. You shared at the end of, like, because I think a lot of people start with this kind of, in today's world, we start at this kind of position of, like, being an atheist, or you start in a religious home and you're like, I've spoken to a lot of people that they grew up in a religious home, and that, that way of looking at spirituality just didn't resonate with them. So then they end up having this atheist stance until they have some kind of experience that, shifts everything.
Or maybe the right word, I guess, for me would be agnostic, because I was always searching kind of, and I guess I had my child Christianity, like I was praying every night, and then, I had this teacher at the university. He was very important to me. He was a philosopher of education, and when you're young, you kind of too easily accept what authorities say, and I was that kind of student, that kind of too easily accepted. And he at one lecture he said that, well, I don't believe in any God or anything, so but I know that many others, I accept that others do. And I kind of, if he, who is a philosopher who's been thinking so much, don't believe in God, then I think I should trust him to that. Kind of, So, and then I kind of stopped questioning for some time, but still I was interested in wisdom and integrity and all those kind of things, and started to study educational policy. That was my master thesis at the time, studying it in a so-called Bildung's historical perspective. That is, Bildung is a European concept for edification or education with a spiritual hint to it, which is the concept. Bildung comes from Meister Eckhart, who saw it as Meister Eckhart. He was a bishop or priest. I'm not sure what kind of position he actually had, but he saw Bildung as becoming more and more aligned with God, created as human being, as created in the image of God, and becoming more and more like God in their development as human beings. And then the Enlightenment came, and this concept of Bildung was kind of secularized. And like Friedrich Schiller, in his little book called On the Aesthetic Education of Man, he writes in one of his letters there that the human being awakes and finds himself in the state. So there's, that you have the secularized concept of Bildung, which, yeah. So in Europe, And in Norway, we still use the word Bildung in the Norwegian term danning, which is something more than being educated for a vocation or, a profession. It's more, being developed as a full human being. In English, you don't really differentiate those two elements of education. And you were talking about how this my mystical experience. I had so many mystical experiences that first year after I said these words. I need to understand what it means from the inside to be a believing person in order to understand the difference between believing and knowing. And one of them is I've written about this in the book, and also other places I've talked about it also. But one of these experiences was that I was working at this psychiatric hospital, and I was making some materials for a course on divorce, also couples courses for divorced parents. And I was about to finish the last chapter in the material for both the educators and the parents in the course material. And I was sitting, it was a Sunday, it was all quiet in the house. My husband at the time, I'm divorced now, but my husband at the time, he had gone out and my children were out. And I was sitting there and it was all quiet in the house, and I heard this voice, turn on the radio. And I said, oh, no, I can't turn on the radio. I don't have time. I need to work. And then at 5 till 11, it came very strongly back. Turn on the radio. And I was like, no, oh, well, since you're so insisting, I just have to turn on the radio then. So I went and turned on the radio. And then the voice came back again, get pen and paper. Okay, now I had surrendered. So I got pen and paper. And then it was first the news, and then it was a Sunday service on the radio, which I never kind of consciously had listened to before. And now it's like my ears were like very, I was present listening. And then it was the bishop in Bergen who said that he, in the sermon, was going to speak about 3 topics. The first was, it was about speaking truly about life and not theoretically, because if we speak theoretically about life, we only end up as false and as hypocrites. Speak truly about life. That was the one. And the other one was everyone makes mistakes. It's human to make mistakes, and you will always be forgiven. And the third was, thank you for the forgiveness and for the new beginning. There's always a new beginning. And it was the story about, Jesus, the Pharisees coming to Jesus with this woman who had been caught in of having committed adultery. And they asked Jesus, what should we do about this woman? She's broken the laws. And Jesus said that those of you who have never sinned or broken the law can throw the first stone. And everybody left, but of course everyone had made mistakes in their lives. And that's what he said to the woman too, you can go too. And the Pharisees kind of asked Jesus a theoretical question, but he answered by talking or speaking truly about life. And this is, about divorce. It's about forgiveness. It's about kind of reconciliation, about new beginnings. So this became keywords in this course: letting go, forgiveness, and new beginnings. So this was one of these very strong experiences of being guided, which I have had lots of them. And also the same year, in 2007, I was sitting during Christmas, and it was really, really some people would say I was sick, and I was probably sick too. I was very, very exhausted at the time because I had worked so much and having 2 small children and a farm. And, it's life can be hard. So I was sitting there, and it was like a kilometer out to people. And it was all love and wisdom and light inside of me, kind of. And then I heard a voice saying, "Are you willing to leave all this and work for me?" I was like, yeah, what can I do? I was like, in one way, I've kind of compared it to what God asked from Abraham when he was asked to offer his child, Isaac. And then he was stopped, because that's also the feeling I had, that I was stopped. No, I was just going to check how if you really were willing to
just testing you, yeah.
to do the work. So, well, these are just 2 of the very strong experiences that I've had.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and like, what piques my curiosity is almost like when you decided that you would look, right? That you would look to try to understand, it's almost like your perception opened. Whereas before, when the perception is closed and it's like, oh, I'm not a believer, I'm an atheist, this is who I am, this is what it is. It's almost like the door is closed. So it seems like there was that opening of perception that allowed these experiences to happen.
It's like channels opened to these higher dimensions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And like, I'm really fascinated about this ability of perception. And this, we're throwing around the word God, and I had this thought. I think yesterday I might have had this thought. I wrote it down. Like, whenever I get these little thoughts, like little aphorisms, I write it down. And it was like, the word God is useful in proportion that it expands perception. And sometimes, like, kind of more traditional religious approaches, or like understandings of religion, they'll use God in a way like, this is who God is, this is what God is, this is good, this is bad. And it closes perception, right? Yes. But there's a way where you could say the word God, and it just whoop, it just, everything opens up, and it's like infinite possibilities.
Yes, it kind of reminds me about one of the first, longitudinal dialogues projects that I did, the Gandhi project. I won a scholarship from the Norwegian Culture and Church and Cultural Department at the time in 2008. In the project, I would try out Dialogos in an intercultural, interreligious context, and see what would happen if it could lead to greater respect and understanding between people from different religions and worldviews and cultures. And at first I thought I would ask religious leaders, but how could I have religious leaders stay with me for 10 dialogues over time? It's like, dream on, it's not going to happen. So I actually, Notto Telle said, why don't you just go to a school? This theologian that wrote these beautiful texts about the wisdom perspectives in Christianity and Islam and Buddhism. And okay, so I did, and there I gathered a group of students aged 18 till 21. And they were with me for 10 dialogues, 3 months almost. And this one guy, I remember it 5 months after the project was over, I gathered the students again for a short interview. Kind of, we just sat, had something to eat and just talked. And then this guy comes in. He was had been a minor refugee from Myanmar, and he had lived for 2 years, hiding from the police in Singapore before he was, on a UN flight to Norway. And he'd been to Norway for 4 years. And he came into the room and he took a glass and he turned it upside down and he said, when we started this project, it was as if I was trapped inside a ring. It was narrow inside of me. And during the project, it was as if, and I stopped, both in life and in school, I just stopped when I encountered a problem. I didn't go any further. But during the project, it was as if a bomb exploded and he made this, bomb figure with his hands. And he said, and it was as I could see into a never-ending horizon. And now when I encounter a problem, whether in life or in school, I never stop anymore because I know there is a way. And I think maybe it's because of, both the widening of the horizons of that he explained very beautifully, but also this struggle with the philosophical concepts and with, being challenged and challenged by the others and challenged by me. And at the end, we kind of always, found a place to at least rest for a while. Because in the dialogues, I always try to make some closure, because it's very tough to go out and of the dialogue and feel that everything is open. So very often we try to answer the question and kind of in order at least to make a closure for the time being. And of course, the days after, they will continue to think and be in dialogue, and so it will. But at least at a place to rest. But on the way there to this place, there's a lot of struggle going on. And I think this is what he explained so beautifully, that even though it's difficult, there is a way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And, there were several other ones like that and that you shared in the book. There's a piece there that you bring in that I really enjoyed, because I really like frameworks and I like maps and I like theories. And even though the map is not the territory, I think they're very useful. And there you share 6 dimensions of wisdom-oriented pedagogy. And I'm actually curious, is this something you came up with yourself, or did you integrate these kind of different perspectives from other people in the field? And maybe you could you share what those 6 are, because I think that's like a big piece that in your book.
Yeah. To your question, is it mine or was I inspired by others? Yes, to both.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Because I started kind of this work in the mid-1990s, actually, when I still was a student, as I told you. Kind of when I asked this question about where is wisdom in this room, that's where this kind of work to develop the Dialogos approach, as I call it, my Dialogos approach, started. And so there's a lot of different inspirational sources, both from classical philosophy and also from the philosophical practice fields. And also my own experiences. And these 6 dimensions, in the middle, there is the I, me, the I of this model. And at the bottom, there's the cultural historical dimension, wisdom dimension, because I think that if we lose contact with history and our historical roots, we lose something very important of our identity as well, or if we don't try to work out those roots, human roots that we have in culture and history on the globe, so to speak. This is kind of one dimension, working with the history and the culture that we are embedded in, because it's simply part of us. So when we do that, we also widen our horizon ourselves. And then there's the in the other end of the spectrum, it's the now I struggle to remember the English words. Ideal, spiritual ideal dimension. Yes, and this could be religious, but it doesn't have to be, because like the story I tell about the Afghan boy or student. He was not a boy, he was a young man in his late 20s. He used forgiveness. We explore forgiveness in a dialogue, and I asked him 1.5 years later if we could have a chat about that dialogue, and he said, "Oh yeah, I can come to your office and I can tell you some more." And this was 1.5 years after, and he tells that this word wisdom, the concept wisdom, ideal forgiveness, he had used as a kind of a navigation compass in his own life ever after those that one dialogue. And this, I think, is how the spiritual ideal dimension can function, that we have these virtues or ideals or ideas like forgiveness, wisdom, love, compassion, that we can have. Like, I want to try to be a compassionate person, and sometimes we are not able to do it. I'm not able to be a dialogical person either always, even though this is what I have been working on for so long, and we're not able to, but still we can keep it as an ideal. And you don't need to be religious in order for that to be helpful. And then you have like the existential emotional dimension, which is the part that maybe together with the communicative relational wisdom dimension connects us to other people. And the existential emotional dimension is, to me, really about understanding your own feelings, and also your existential issue, coming to terms with the fact that you're dying, the fact that will at least at some point you will lose people around you, accepting kind of those inevitable things that come to us in life, and be able. And this is not, of course, it's not easy, but I think wisdom is also about developing this capacity to endure whatever suffering life brings upon us also. And then the communicative relational dimension, which is really about this heart to heart, being able to connect to others heart to heart. And I guess, yeah, and when we do that, we both change. And I think this is where the healing, maybe healing can happen all around, but especially I think when you encounter a person like a teacher who really sees a child and are able to do the things that needs to be done for this child to be able to succeed in his life or her life, with school, but also outside school. It makes such a tremendous difference. And then maybe this child again will be able to help others just by being able to connect. So this dimension, and then you have the critical analytical dimension, which is what we normally, I guess, hold as mostly philosophical, but I think this is only a limited part of wisdom, at least, and philosophy as searching wisdom, as love for wisdom. So of course the critical analytical dimension is important, and we can't do without it, but it's not enough to become wise. On the contrary, you can be a very intelligent person and be like Hitler or like Putin or like obviously they're intelligent, and have a lot of critical analytical capacity, but maybe they lack some of the other wisdom dimensions. Because I think wisdom and compassion and love and wishing other well is maybe key, or the core of wisdom. And then finally, you have the practical ethical wisdom dimension, which is really the ability to act in a morally sound way with other people in the world. And of course, we can miss out, nobody are perfect, and we may make mistakes. We don't always succeed, but still, and sometimes it's the failures that really makes us wiser, or makes us get in touch with ourselves. So, and this could also be part of this practical ethical wisdom dimension, having made those mistakes that make you a better person, actually. So it's not about being perfect, but it's about, maybe, as I talk about in the book as well, having the will to wisdom, the willingness to be in a way that is healthy for yourself and for others and for the world, maybe. And then accepting that neither we or others always are able to. If that's kind of answers to your question there.
Yeah. And I love you have a diagram, and I'm going to try to see if I can get the image of that to throw on, to have somebody edit into this podcast so they can kind of see as you're describing these 6 dimensions. And I really love, it feels very integrative to me. And my sense is, when people think about philosophizing, it is kind of more critical, analytical, maybe practical, ethical. Like, that's the way I would think about it. And I think that's how most people think about philosophy. But then you bring in all these other pieces where you have the culture, and that, the culture you're embedded in, the history, all the people that came before you, everything that happened before you. It's a part of yourself, like yourself, the experience of yourself isn't divorced. It's not separated from everything that came before. And then the relational aspect, your ability to engage and talk to other people. That's also there's a lot of research that shows that our self is actually created through our interactions with others. Like, if we didn't have relationships, there really wouldn't be this sense of a self. And the spiritual ideal dimension, and existential emotional dimension is just kind of, what I feel like a lot of spirituality is really about, like tapping into these more deeper, meaningful, some of these words and some of these things that, like you mentioned in the book, the good, the true, and the beautiful. They're like words we can't really define. We use them, to kind of talk about other aspects in other words. They're almost like these spiritual ideals that you can't really define, but that, we seem to experience. And those, like, we have this experience, and the best word we could, like, that was good, or this is beauty, or this is truth. So I really love how you put these pieces together, and it just has like this wholeness, a sense of wholeness to me. And I wish that people can think about philosophy in this way, because I think it makes it a lot more alive and less kind of dry, how a lot of people think about philosophy.
Well, what I really regret is that I also didn't also give more room kind of for the body, but it is, in the eye inside there, it could be, worked out a little bit more, because I think that the embodiment of all this is really crucial. If we are to talk about wise people, it's because maybe they have embodied some of these dimensions. And maybe there's also kind of a bodily wisdom in being able to keep your body fit, even. Of course, we are dying in the end, but yeah.
Yeah, so maybe a 7th one would be a somatic dimension, but for me, kind of like the emotional and the relational communicative dimension almost feels like it has a somatic sense. The practice that I do, the circling practice, which, it has a lot of overlap with this. What I've learned is to kind of sense my emotions better and with the help of others, because sometimes you feel something and you don't even know what you're feeling, but other people see your face and they can see your emotions better than sometimes you can. And you kind of learn to pick up on other people and also to sense into your body, like what's happening there. So it almost feels like to really understand, like emotions is the language of relationships. So our ability to understand our emotions and understand others' emotions helps us have better relationships and better communication and dialogue with other people. Like that's been my experience.
Yes. And also you mentioned, the how we are embedded in culture, and how much of this is very much sensational, kind of it's bodily sensations. And I'm just, these Bildung thinkers, they talked about Bildung as the ability to make the implicit explicit. I mean, making what is inside of us explicit through language. And also, being able to put words onto, the feelings that we have, and how all the emotions, and also what is happening between us in relations. It's a very, I think so. It's, sometimes what we lack in this world, this ability on the larger scale. Like schooling is so much about, putting knowledge, stacking knowledge on top of each other. It's not about, it's a kind of a weird system we have created. And I think a lot of children also become sick simply from this system, not being able to cope, not being measured all the time. I mean, I'm so happy I'm not, in a classroom where everything I do is measured and graded, and where making mistakes is kind of can be fatal, because you might not get into the university that you wanted to get into, or so you have this pressure all the time, which is very, very unhealthy. So what we are talking about here is really taking the human being seriously.
Yeah, I love that you brought in this aspect of, well, we're talking about education, and a wisdom-oriented kind of education, but this definitely resonates. Like in my experience of education in America, I was educated in America, and what education was here, and I had actually this guy Zach Stein. He's been on my podcast twice, but he's a fascinating thinker, and he's an educational philosopher. And he also talks about something that he calls the measurement crisis. It's like everybody, like we're constantly measuring things, and it's like, well, somebody decides how we measure, like, and then we're kind of like a slave to that system. And it's not natural. It's like not natural. It becomes very mechanical, and it misses all these other aspects. And I have two children, two boys. One is about to be 4. The other one is 2. Yeah. So we're thinking about how do we educate them, and like my wife is huge on them just really just playing and being in the dirt and being in nature, and like writing and learning and math, like all of that's important and it needs to be integrated. But it feels like there's a lot of the way people look at education. It's like, oh, we need to get them writing and reading and doing all these structured things as soon as possible, instead of allowing them to kind of have more of this free flowing, like natural process that it seems like they're almost wired to do, and then gradually introduce these other aspects. And yeah, I don't know. It's like one of my wife's friends, the kid, I think the kid, he was also in a daycare, and he like misspelled his name. And then the teacher wrote, I think he was like 3 years old or 4 years old at the time. And the teacher wrote, "Oh, he's spelling his name wrong." Like it was like a report. He had a report card at 4 years old. And the teacher actually misspelled his name wrong herself on the actual thing. And she was expecting the kid to spell his name right, where she couldn't spell it right. And it was just blowing my mind. It's like, this kid is not even 4 years old, and he already has a report card telling him that he's not good enough, or he's doing something wrong.
I get the creeps almost, to be honest, because I think it's very damaging. But of course, of course, reading and writing and learning math is very important in order to kind of get around in the society that we have created. So, and that is important too, of course, to be able to. So, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book Emile really tries to understand, this. He kind of envisions an education where Emile can live in nature and have his own teacher that follows him, and until he's 15 years old, and only then he can go into society. And because society messes us up. And Rousseau himself had 5 children, and they were all brought up in these nursing homes. So he wasn't a very successful father himself. But I guess there's always been this struggle between the individual urges and cultural demands, so to speak. So I am not sure how we in our time can go about to kind of reconcile those two. This is really what my book is about, trying, the Dialogos way through philosophizing, both through in reading and writing and in dialogue, face to face, to reconcile theory and practice, culture and individuality. Yeah.
This is, I think, would be a good time for you to kind of maybe just kind of explain what this process, like paint a picture of what this process looks like when you facilitate dialogos with students or participants.
Yes, in teacher education where I work, I don't have a special course called the Dialogos course. So I think rather I'll explain how I do a retreat. And then after that, I can say something about how I try to kind of include or integrate the way of thinking with students and also with schools that I work with. So in a Dialogos retreat, I would also often start with a personal question, asking participants, where are you in your life at the moment? And do you have a question? And they just write down a personal question, whatever form. And then sometimes, depending on how huge the group is and if people know each other, or if it's like last time I had this Dialogos retreat, it was in a yoga hotel in the mountains of Norway. So there, everyone just were thinking and then writing their question, and they kind of put it in their pocket. And then they gathered, and from that they created philosophical questions. And we had 3 philosophical questions that we were using during the weekend. And we also had, so then I worked rather rationally the first day, in order for people to not too personal, be personal by sharing personal examples. I asked, for instance, one question that many people have come up with during the years is, how can I accept the changes of my life? And then I would ask describe an example from your own life where you experienced that you accepted changes in your life. And then we will tell the stories, and then from there we will start to explore what does it really imply to accept the changes in your life. And then this can take 2 hours, it could take a day, it can even take 3 days if you want to, depending on how deep you want to go. And then we will also include, like last time, I had my good colleague Camilla Angertun with me, and she facilitated as part of this Dialogos process and meditation inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh about walking meditation. So we walked and felt our feet. And it was a beautiful exercise because I realized that for the first time, I really could feel the muscles in my feet moving, the small muscles, and how my toes work to balance. It's very interesting, actually. Yes, and then we continue with new exercises. We had an exercise on human camera where, we were looking for beauty and showed pictures of beauty and then philosophized upon beauty. And we had a dynamic meditation inspired by Osho. And we had also some exercise inspired by Oscar Brennefier, rather, working with the dichotomies. And in the end, the whole thing started with them picking a picture that could say something about where they were in their life at the moment. And then 3 days after, when we ended the workshop, they picked a new picture. And then we stood in the ring and they showed the pictures and talked about their process they had during the workshop. So this is really how I would like to work with students as well.
Yeah. The question is, why don't you have a Dialogos course like this in the university? Is it something they're against, or is there some barriers to creating that?
Now everything costs money, and so far I've only done it. I had a course once called philosophical dialogue within intercultural understanding and religion, a course on that. But then this course was closed down because the whole program was closed down. So this happens, in universities, these bigger organizations. And so far I haven't been able to argue that it should have its own place. And me and my colleague Mikael Noah Weiss, and we're really trying to, lift this also through reflective practice research, which is a philosophical way of doing research, where you kind of look at experiences from your own life or practice, and then philosophize upon it, kind of, and then relate it to theory, kind of in a cultural and historical way. So we're exploring and trying to find ways to give room for this kind of thinking and dialoguing and working without necessarily calling it philosophizing in the Dialogos way, at least. But what I do really is it's integrated in small portions in the way students work with integrating experiences and theory, and also in essay writing, where they take their point of departure in something that they have experienced and then philosophize upon it in an essayistic way, integrating theory and practice that way. So this is a way that I work. And now, just before I came onto your podcast, I was at a meeting with a school and a high school with the leader group there. We've been working together for 4 years, and the entire everyone working at that school, even the janitor and the cleaning people and the leader group and it's also a vocational school, so there are people working with, you know, electronics, industrial production, you know, carpeting, restaurant and food production. Yeah, kind of a natural. Now I have to do the translation in my head while talking. Yeah, agricultural.
Yeah.
So they have all in addition to regular academic subjects. So all the teachers have had one day of philosophical dialogue, the Dialogos way, and they are going to have a new round, both with the leader group and every employee at the school, teachers and everyone else is going to have a new day next year. So and I'll obviously need to write about it in order to kind of provide an example of how it's possible to work this way and try to enhance wisdom.
Yeah. I think that's part of, the part of the reason I'm having this conversation with you is, I think that's, what John Vervaeke talks about. He talks about wisdom. I think that's what Zach Stein, who I've had on my podcast several times, he speaks about wisdom. In a lot of the spaces that I move in, that's like a foundational conversation. They recently had an event and John Vervaeke was there. I believe Zach was there. All these figures that move around in the spaces that I'm interested in. They kind of met at this monastery and they had a whole conversation. It was like an event. It was like a retreat for 4 or 5 days. And it was all about wisdom. It was like, what is wisdom? How do we cultivate it? And there's also this idea that there's a wisdom famine, right? It's like we have intelligence, we have the ability to produce and to grow, but it seems like wisdom is not, it seems like on a cultural level, we don't admire the people that are necessarily wise. We admire, people that have a lot of money, people that are famous. Like that's who people look to. And it's almost like we've forgotten the sage. We've forgotten the people that were sages and the people that were wise. So I'm very passionate about kind of how do we orient our society towards this? And, how do we allow people, because it seems like something needs to happen inside a human for them to recognize that this is actually, it's so necessary. Philosophy is, it's the love of wisdom, and it's almost like, how can I live my life better? Like it's almost the foundational question. So it almost feels like, well, how do we not think about that? How could philosophy not be important to everybody? But it seems like it's not. Like it seems like for a very small percentage of people, it's very important. But for the vast majority, it's like, why is this important?
Yes, and not only that, but I still experience that people are kind of scared of the word philosophy and philosophizing and philosophical dialogue. It's like, that's not my cup of tea, or that's too difficult for me, but yes. Actually it's, I did it, also from the book that I had this small conversation with my children. They're now 22 and 23, but when they were like maybe 6-7 years old, they were sitting with two of their friends around the kitchen table, and I was sitting there too. And I don't know where this note came from, but all of a sudden my son just drew up this note and it said, a good person. Et godt menneske, a good person. And then I thought, I need to, I have to take this chance. So I asked, well, what do you think? What is a good person? And then these small children started to philosophize, and they said, like, well, a good person is a person who takes your friends, you plays with your friends, and and we kept going for like half an hour, and then all of a sudden my son goes, a good person is a person who is good to the evil, or to the bad ones, is actually what he said, but in Norwegian. So yeah. And I was like, whoa. That's actually, Socrates, who is said to be the first in history to say that you shouldn't be you should be good to everyone, also your enemies. And then Jesus, of course, who said,
Yes.
turn the other cheek. And then Mahatma Gandhi, who kind of said that everyone, he didn't want to kill people for weaknesses that we all have. And as soon as people kind of had realized they were wrong, they were on his side, and he included them. So this little child, 7 years old, he kind of pinpointed this ancient wisdom. Yeah. So, and of course, I've been telling this story over and over again to them. Of course, they remember, but you never know. But I think even though children might not remember, I think at still it, it's a glimpse for them. It makes a movement inside of them, so to speak. They have an aha insight there, and then when you have those small glimpses or those aha experiences, you can't really go back. Something is changed, even though you can't really pinpoint what it was that happened or what it was you understood or.
Yeah, there's so many pieces there. I mean, I love that you shared that. I was actually going to ask you about another story that you shared in the book, but I love that you shared the story about your children. Because I'm really just thinking about like moms and dads and like families and like why would they think that philosophizing is important? But you actually show how you've used this process with your own children. And then the other piece that you were just saying about how once you have kind of a glimpse into wisdom, into something deeper, into it stays with you on some level. It's always there, and it's like you might forget about it, but when that situation comes, it'll inform how you respond. When there's a situation where now you need it, it's like you have the wisdom to use because it's almost like it's been accessed and it's there. So that seems like it's a really important part. And I would love if you could tell the other story that you shared. I think it was about something about your children saying like, "What happens when we die?"
When we die, yes.
Yeah, that was a great story. Yeah,
that was in 2004, actually. Also, this in April, and my daughter, she would turn 4 in May, so she was not 4 years old yet. And my son, he's only 15 months older, so he had just turned 5. 3 months older. So now I mean 15 months older. Yes.
Yeah.
I've written about this in Norwegian though, also in an article. And my daughter comes, and I was waiting some friends over, so I was really busy. So I didn't really have the time to listen to her. But she came and she was so tense, and she said, "Oh, Mama, what happens when we die? Are you going to die, Mama? Am I going to die? I don't want to be buried when I die. What happens when we die, Mama?" She was like very much, on the edge. And I was like, oh, how do I answer? What can I say? I mean, I can't give her my atheist answer, at least. I mean, yeah, we are buried and then we disappear. So I kind of took that diplomatic way. So I said that, well, some people think that we just get buried and die, disappear, and other things that we come to God when we die. Oh, what do you think, Mama? She's like pressing me, and it's like, and I couldn't answer her. And then my friends were coming, and I had the pizza in the oven and everything. So yeah. So and a couple of weeks later, and this kept, working in me, and I didn't really have, how can I answer this? And then we were going to drive, and my children were in their seats in the back, and then my son Magnus, 5 years old, he said, "Angels never die, they." Engler, de dør aldri, de. And Christine says, "Oh, I wish I was an angel. But Christine, you become an angel when you die, my son said.
I love it. I love
And
that so much.
then her, her little body was like 10 kilos lighter. I could just feel the atmosphere in the car changing, and she could relax because she would become an angel when she died. And I could not, I just let them have their answer. It was as good as my answer. I didn't have an answer either. So this is really, and this is kind of a clash of understandings that is not really, it's not really possible to solve it. And in our time, there are so many possibilities. It's like if you grew up in the Middle Ages, there would have been one answer kind of. We live in a time where there's multiple answers, and this is also very challenging. For how can it's difficult to be a parent and guide children in a way that keeps them so safe and trustful, so to speak, and at the same time allows them to develop in their own pace and find their own answers and their own solutions. So it's this really difficult balancing that parents today have to handle, which it's much easier, I guess, but also then you maybe live more in an illusion if you live in a society that with set answers.
Yeah, like as you were talking, the thread that was moving through me was that it's not so, like it seems like it's not so much about giving your kids the answer, right? Like them asking you this question, but more so guiding and supporting them in questioning, in learning how to question, right? It's like, how can we guide our youth? How can we guide children, and how can we guide ourselves to be better at questioning things and coming up with answers that, like you said before, they might be temporary. It's a temporary answer that, we create a temporary ground only for it to kind of dissolve, and then we continue questioning. But it's this process of questioning that seems to be central at Dialogos, and that's important more so than just having an answer like, oh, this is what happens when we die. Don't worry about it. Put it away. Like, you don't got to think about it anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's almost and now I can't find the English word again. Like yeah, you do unjust to the children.
Yes.
If you provide them with set answers where it's not within the human capacity to be able to give set answers, really. And then when you're really bombastic, it's that's when dialogue stops as well, questioning stops. And school also do a lot of that, I think. And Matthew Lipman, one of the great American sons in the field of philosophical practice and philosophy with children, he worked at Montclair State University. He also were very concerned about let children keep questioning, because what school does is really, put a lid on the curiosity and yeah. And also adults, I guess it could be an adult virtue as well to be open enough to continuously question what is around us, or at least accept that we don't have, there's so many things that we simply can't be bombastic about. I can't be bombastic about God either, even though I had these mystical experiences, because I got a peek into something that is bigger than me, but I don't overview it. I have no idea about what God is like, if God is the right word.
Yeah, it's like it's like you peek behind the veil. You get a peek and then it closes, and then you're back to being kind of the small self, living your life in time and space. But you have like a taste of infinity, and it's like, where do I put this? How do I'm back to being me. I'm back to being me, moving through space and time, having to deal with the practical matters of life.
Yeah. Like mowing the lawn, like I had to do in the morning because I'm going to India the day after tomorrow. It's like all these practical things that you have to do amongst.
It's all God's work, like mowing the lawn, or like I'll sometimes I'll be getting a haircut and I'll be joking to my barber. I'm like, oh, he'll be doing my beard. I'm like, oh, it's just God. It's just God cutting God's beard. Like it's just very like this very practical stuff that we do, and it's all like a reflection of what can be explained.
And speaking about God, human beings as God, I'm going to India now, have a project going on also on the philosophical dialogues with teacher educators there. But they see guests as gods, and they give coconut to gods. And that's why when you are a guest in India, often you will get a coconut. And it's kind of a beautiful image of seeing other people as images of God, so to speak.
One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ram Dass, and he was a Harvard professor, and he was like a pioneer in the psychedelic movement. But he also went to India, and he met his guru in India. And one of the teachings from his guru was see everybody as God in drag. Like every single person you run, it's just God in a disguise, testing you. Like, how are you going to treat me? How are you going to treat me? So I think that's a wonderful. I think it's a very difficult kind of spiritual ideal to live with, but it's a beautiful way of looking at the world and at others.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up is Ramana Maharshi. He was this also Indian sage, and they used to ask him like, "Oh, how do you treat others? How should you treat others?" And he used to say, "There are no others." That always stuck with me. It was just such a powerful way of looking at the world.
Yeah, we're one. And what you do to others, you do to yourself. And that's also the idea of karma in the yoga tradition, for instance, or the Hindu tradition, that what you kind of put into the world have consequences, and eventually they come back to you in one way or another.
Absolutely.
And to me, there's so much similarities between when you really try to get to the core of the world religions, on the human aspect of it and the experiential aspect of it, not really necessarily the teachings or the how humans have made their religions, how they look from the outside, so to speak, when people practice it, but if you look to the core, there's so much in common, because it's really about developing yourself as a good human being with others.
Yeah, it makes me think about the framing you gave a little bit earlier about Bildung. Like I've actually
Bildung,
never heard of that. Like making yourself into the image of God, like more and more moving towards like this ideal you can never fully embody, but it's like it's almost like people, humans, the world, it's almost like moving towards that.
Yeah. And that's also kind of the tree of life image in the Bible. I think it's the Psalms. It says that. Don't quote me on that, but it says that wisdom is the tree of life, and I think that's also a beautiful question. Metaphor.
It's always growing, and it's never final.
Yeah, and also, from the fruits you shall see, understand what the tree is like, is also a saying, and this is a variant, I think, of the karma.
Yes.
idea.
Yeah, I also have this perennial kind of view that all the religions they're all talking about the same thing. It's just different fingers. It's all different fingers pointing to the same moon.
Yeah. Yeah. And they all kind of involve human experience. And the big
questions.
Yeah, and the big people also, they're like Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Socrates, even. They're kind of figures who have experiences beyond what normal people have, and have been able to transmit them in a way that has the power of transforming other people's lives as well, and make others grow.
Yeah, I think for me also, it's like there's a belief, and then really the experience that we too can have those experiences that the great sages and the mystics talk about. And you've had some of these experiences, and I've had these experiences, and there's different ways to have these experiences. For some people it's psychedelics, for some people it's meditation, for some people it's giving birth to a child, just to see the divinity, the sacredness of all of existence, and how precious and miraculous and mysterious and wondrous it all is. It's like we all can have those experiences. It's not like reserved for a special few.
No, I totally agree that this is for all, and this is also what the Dialogos approach is really about, is by opening the doors a little bit, or the windows into this, without going too far, because I think that's dangerous. We should really not push to, people need to be ready, and they have to go in their own pace. So that's why I'm a little reluctant to, pushing too much in school, for instance, or because you can also kind of get a little bit lost, I think, if you're not ready.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I was ready because I asked the questions, but I didn't expect to receive what I got. It was totally mind-blowing.
Yeah. A part of me feels like you're never ready. Like you're never ready for that taste. You're never ready to let go of yourself for something that's beyond you. But when it comes, that's when it comes, almost like it just happens.
Yeah, and then maybe the most important insight is to see how small you are.
And how big you are at the same time.
At the same time, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You're a drop in the ocean, but you're also there's also the ocean in the drop. So it's like it goes full circle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite marvelous to think about life and the world in this way. Because everything becomes very much alive.
Yeah, so
do you know the Kabbalah, by the way?
I'm not like familiar with a lot of the teachings, but when you were bringing up the tree of life, that's what I was thinking about, because I think that's also part of their teachings. Mm-hmm. The tree of life, it's also there.
Yes, and my good colleague Mikael Noah Weiss, when he first saw the Dialogos map, these 6 dimensions, yes, he said, wow, this looks exactly like the Kabbalah. And then I looked it up, and it was also quite mind-blowing that it was so similar. And I didn't look into that tradition.
Yeah. It's like wisdom is transpersonal. It's, it kind of reminds me of like Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. Yes. Like they're just, these ideas exist everywhere. Yes. They're beyond space-time. And that's why people have similar ideas or these similar archetypical patterns that yes. they don't have no contact to one another.
Yes. And ideas, and this is also kind of been the case throughout world history, like the pyramids, which you can go to Chichen Itza and the Egypt. You have this pyramid buildings several places in the world, and you have like the ideas of Socrates, Buddha, and Confucius in China happened within 100 years, and they transformed life and the thinking of in their contexts within that same 100 years. And this is also what I sometimes experience, that people have had similar ideas to myself or without, and I get surprised. Wow. I thought it was my idea, but it's floating around. I may be downloading it. People downloading the same ideas at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. And, you know, I kind of asked you that question before. I was like, oh, did you come up with this? And it's like, it's almost like there's no ideas that are really your own. It's kind of, we're playing with the same material and we're remixing it. And
yes.
The other thing that was popping up for me was, you know, this notion of cosmology, and how there's this guy, Richard Tarnas, and he talks about how there's these patterns of like when the planets align in a certain way, certain things happen, like revolutions happen when certain planets, it's like things just seem to happen in this kind of way. And like, I know like Darwin's, his theory of evolution, there was somebody who created a very similar theory to him almost at the same time. So it's almost like these ideas are like, they're somewhere in like the unmanifest. And then when the time is ready, they just bubble up in the noosphere. And then people are just start sensing into them. Oh yeah, this needs to be made. This needs to be materialized now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And then the ego kind of becomes scattered, so to speak, when you think that way, because then it's not you or me who are doing it, but it's really being done through us. And we become like an instrument, so to speak, or a medium.
I'm all about scattering egos. I'm all about that. We need more of that.
Yeah. Like one of my American colleagues in the field of philosophical practice says that we need more of this, you know, soft power. We have so much hard power, which is money and, you know, the political power. And the soft power is really the wisdom. And compassion and love and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it's harder to measure. That's why it's like soft. It's a soft metric that you can't really, it's difficult to measure. You can measure how much money you have in the bank account, but how much wisdom does the person have? Like you can't really measure it.
No, and it's also not, you can easily be kind of like considered a wise person, and then you can do something very stupid that changes it, you know, like wisdom is not something that can be stable.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, like, I don't like to say that there's good or bad people. Like there's just good and bad actions, or, you know, positive or negative patterns. And maybe there's people that are wiser, act wiser more consistently, but really it's like anybody has the potential to kind of tap into wisdom if they open to it. Yeah.
Well, I really like, you know, the philosophy of Gandhi. Not that I've gone very intensively into it, but, you know, this, he's saying that, what I said earlier too, that we have weaknesses, and ignorance is, you know, one of those weaknesses. Wisdom is really maybe the knowledge of the human nature and the human condition, while evil sometimes maybe is the opposite, the ignorance of, so that you act upon fear and all, and we all do it. I mean, I too, of course, act sometimes upon fear or.
Yeah, I mean, there's well, maybe Jordan Peterson. He's kind of a big phenomenon, and he's some people don't have he's become less popular in certain circles as of late because a lot of his stuff has gotten kind of become more political. But he has a book called Maps of Meaning, and it's a fascinating exploration of depth psychology and religion and archetypes. And the central question he's kind of been studying is like, about evil. Where does evil come from? And it kind of the conclusion he's come to is when we fail to recognize and to see these shadow aspects of ourselves, that's actually what that's what creates evil. And that feels like that's what you're saying. It's like being mindful of like, yes, I have flaws and I have shadows and I'm capable of doing really bad things, and it's like remembering that's what prevents us from actually acting that out.
Yeah, it's really, I feel that these issues are so important in our time. It's of course always been important, and the fact that we can think with Plato, Aristotle, that we can think with Patanjali, with Buddha, with all these people that has gone before us, the philosophers, and make sense of it, and it can be guiding us in our lives today. To me, this is really, this means that human beings have something in common across time and across cultures, and it's really global, or and timelessly human. I mean, humans haven't been here through all times, but as long as humans have been here, we have certain capacities that are similar across time and across continents.
Yeah, the big questions have always been the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here?
Yeah.
Where is all this coming from? They've always been there. They'll always will be here.
Yeah. And this is probably also, I've experienced so many times that, you meet people other places in the world, and sometimes you have this sense that you have this deep connection that it's more difficult to have with people at home that you're seemingly more similar, culturally similar to. But it's sometimes more rare at home than if you go out, maybe because when you go out to meet people that are kind of in your clan, so to speak. But yeah.
Yeah, a lot of energy. What you saying, I feel a lot of energy moving in my chest hearing that. I feel like I was just talking to somebody about that, how I actually, the internet and this capacity to talk, and like the fact that I created this podcast and I could talk to people all across the world. And I'm talking to people in different cities and different countries, and I connect with them so much. And it's almost like it's harder to find that in kind of being confined to a small geographic area, just who's around here, and just this technology of the internet and this ability to speak to people all around the world. It's it's been amazing in my life. Like I feel like I am able to connect with people on a deeper level about things that matter to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm also like, right now I'm working on an article on together with my colleague Mikael Noah Weiss and also Christian Stokke, which I've written a couple of articles on the Gandhi project with before. But we have this article called Ways of Understanding, where we kind of explore is my experiences of being guided, having, the kind of a divine guidance. That's my interpretation. But all these chains of incidents that can be interpreted as coincidences, or as just, something that chains that I have put meaning into, or they can be interpreted as kind of divine guidance or synchronicities. So we call the article Ways of Understanding, and put up these 3 ways of interpreting these incidents, chains of incidents, which is really also, tapping into different forms of consciousness. Because if you have a very rational consciousness form, if that's your way of being, and you are into logic, and then you would probably say that all these incidents are they're just coincidences. There's nothing, no relationships, it's what you make of it, and it's rational choices. Come on, without any deeper meaning at all. And then you can have like a humanistic understanding, where you interpret them as meaningful, but not necessarily in a religious way, but still giving the meaning. And then the last one, where you kind of also. But synchronicity, the research on synchronicity doesn't necessarily include a divine being. But it could also. So.
Yeah. I mean, like I was recently writing about this, but the idea of synchronicity, Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity, is I feel like in my own life, I feel it more and more.
Yeah.
I feel like the people I'm talking to, it's like, yes, like this is the person I need to talk to. And it's like, I didn't know that I needed to talk to this person. Somehow all these things, these books, these ideas, these people are coming in crossing paths with me somehow. But it feels like more and more, I feel like, yes, this is like I'm going in the right direction. And this is exactly who I need to talk to. And then the next person, this is exactly who I need to talk to now. And it's funny you said your paper is called Ways of Understanding. I've been diving really deeply into this guy, Rob Burbea's teachings. He's a Buddhist Dharma teacher. He passed away several years ago, but his teachings is called Ways of Looking. And he says that there's only ways of looking, and there's different ways of looking, and the way we look at things creates the reality. And it's just funny that your paper is also called Ways of Understanding. And as I've been exploring his stuff and phenomenology and meditation and just perception, and how do we expand perception, how do we open perception, and like Dialogos also feels like that's what it's doing, it's opening perception, and I don't know, just very fascinating, this whole it feels like for the last maybe 30 minutes, it feels like we've been in the Dialogos. It kind of, before it was more of maybe like throwing questions, and now it just feels like we've been kind of riffing off of each other's ideas and creating this, stoking the fire of Dialogos. That's what Vervaeke calls it.
Yeah. We an article that is coming out also quite soon that Mikael and I have written. We use the metaphor of the kaleidoscope to, we call it kaleidoscopic epistemology, as kaleidoscopic knowledge, because if you, like a kaleidoscope, you have pieces, and when you turn the kaleidoscope, they fall into new patterns. And really, at least human truth again, you have fact-based knowledge. This person said this and this and this, and you can, after this podcast, people can listen and say that you said this and I said this, and it would be facts, but it's not. But still, it would be interpretations that people would make. So it also, those kind of word facts can also enter into the kaleidoscope. And if you dig really into trying to understand the topic that we have been talking about, you kind of dig even deeper down.
Yeah, this whole notion of facts, it's also like a theme that I've been exploring. Like people are like, oh, there's the facts of the world. Like, these are the facts. Everybody knows the facts. Clearly, that's not the case. People are often, when we argue about things, they're not like very objective things. We're not arguing about, is 2 + 2 4, or is this an apple? Nobody's like, if I hold up an apple, nobody is arguing about, is that an apple? But it's more of these kind of subjective things that people seem to argue about. They're not very factual. They're very much emotional, and they're alive, and they're moving through us. And it makes me think, there's another thinker, Charles Eisenstein. He says that reality is a conversation. It's like we're constantly talking about it. We're constantly creating it. It's moving through us as us.
Yeah. And it's really, how the world now is changing, at least in Europe. I don't know how it looks from the United States, actually, because you're more distant to it. But Ukraine feels very close to us. Yes. Also because we get the refugees, of course. And I myself I worked with Ukrainian teacher educators before, in 2018 and through 2019. So I had contact with them also. But what I was really going to say is that how kind of in a blink of an eye, the way we perceive each other in the world it can change. Like how the West kind of shut off Russia, and this polarization that is going on, and also the polarization I also that I see only, of course, from Europe, and it looks differently than if you are in the United States. But the polarization between the Republicans and the conservatives in the US, which is, to me, from the outside, looks very scary, actually.
Yes.
And it's just about words and power and money, of course, and beliefs, but yeah, the power of words, really, and understandings, both to reconcile and to make splits and polarize.
I'm actually originally from Ukraine.
Yeah, you are. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. I don't have family there, but yeah, that is originally where I'm from, and it's really sad to see what's happening there.
Yes.
And like the polarization is, I imagine it's everywhere, but it's become in the United States, it's become very, very problematic. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in the spaces that I move in, that's what we're kind of thinking about. And how do we bring people together? How do we integrate perspectives? How do we stop being so sure that our way is the right way? Mm. And maybe we have a piece and this person has a piece, and we need to put it together and to be in this constant dialogue.
That's a kaleidoscope. Yeah. Yes. Which is also actually in the model, the Dialogos model. It could also be a kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, of course, is of course that there are so many possibilities of really destroying each other in this world today with all the weapons, and but that's a different story. And it really, so we really need wise leaders.
Yes. This is in the spaces that I move in, the existential risk. the meta crisis, the meaning crisis, all these converging crises, you know, Zach Stein says, the education crisis, like there's all these different crises that are reaching this point, and it's like our ability to move through them and not self-destruct and destroy the whole world, you know, artificial intelligence, all these pieces, a lot of it depends on our ability to tap into wisdom, this ability that we all have. It's available to all of us, but how do we learn how, you know, one of the things you said is you can't teach it, right? You can't teach wisdom. It's like, what, you know, how do we tune into this and more and more and recognize that it's so important now more than ever before?
I think that if we can teach it, it would be through dialogue, through both creating dialogues between people, and, you know, letting perspectives float, but also speaking from the bottom of one's stomach and heart, from speaking what is true, referring back to the radio mystic experience that I had. Speak truly about life, not theoretically.
Yeah, Guro, I mean, this has been a fascinating exploration. This is particularly this kind of end, really kind of enjoyed. I feel like we can keep riding this wave. But I think it's, you know, I think it's a good place to maybe start closing it up. And I guess the last question I would kind of ask is, you know, is there anything you wish I would have asked, or is there anything you would like to share before we kind of wrap up? Any last message or anything that's alive in you that you want to transmit?
Oh, since you asked about what is really Dialogos about, to repeat, maybe just to say that it's about deep connections, existentially, emotionally, worldview wise, that we can exchange, and through this move and develop as human beings together. This is really what the Dialogos is about. And then there's all these different exercises in the book that can be used for it in schools, in teacher education, and in other forms of education, in society, retreats. Yeah, if that's what Dialogos is about, then I'm all about Dialogos, and this is definitely something that I want to incorporate more and more into my life. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing and for being immersed in this and trying to bring this around and spread it in different places. I know you have this trip to India coming up where you'll be teaching this as well. And just thank you for your work, and thanks so much for coming on and having this conversation with me here today. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure and great to get to know you. And I hope this won't be the last time.
Yes.
We'll speak to each other.
I'm sure we will. I would love to speak again. All right.
Yeah.
All right, Guro. All the best.
To you too. You too. Bye-bye.